Hello everyone, it's Nina. Thanks so much for joining me today. Today I'm going to be sharing with you some watercoloring techniques using inexpensive watercolors to create beautiful and fun results that involve no stamping and just some simple supplies. You can even most likely raid your kids' art supply stash to use some simple supplies that you have on hand, and I'm going to be sharing this with you today. So here I've got an inexpensive watercolor set from Royal and Langnickel. It was about $8, $5 to $8, somewhere around there. And I've got some paint brushes. You can use whatever types of paint brushes you want, but I do recommend using a round brush. I'm also going to be using a palette, but you could use the paints right out of the wells itself. So to use my palette, I'm going to go ahead and start picking up a lot of this paint with my brush. I'm wetting it with a lot of water and then just lifting the paint out of the wells and into my little palette here. I'm squeezing the brush on the edges of the wells of my palette. And this is just squeezing the paint out of the brush, so that way I have a nice place for it to be able to pick up color and easily mix things. So I'm just going to quickly pick up all my colors. I'm just using 4 colors for this. I'm going to use pink, purple, blue, and red. And I'm going to be starting off with our background technique. This is the easiest of all 3. So I'm going to take some watercolor paper. You can use any kind of watercolor paper. I'm going to be showing you this on some student grade Canson XL watercolor paper. This is very inexpensive and it's very easy to use for pretty much any type of painting that you're going to be doing. So these techniques today are all showing you products that you can buy at your local craft store and that are really easy and inexpensive to pick up. So I'm going to start by watercoloring a background. Now this is the easiest again of all the techniques I'm going to be sharing. I'm just quickly dropping watercolor onto my paper here, quickly spreading it around. I'm using a little bit of water and just kind of mixing things up. And I'm leaving the edges kind of hard in spots because I want the paper to have some texture to it. So I'm going to keep adding in some color. I'm going to bring in some purple. I'm going to start dropping this in. And you can see it creates kind of like a bloom. And we're just going to go ahead and blend this out with our brush. You can blend this out if you want to, or you can just leave it there as is. It kind of creates a really pretty and interesting texture. But I wanted to be able to have these colors blending a little bit. So I just went ahead and blended that out with my paper. And then I'm going to move on to the next layer. I'm drawing in between layers so that way I maintain some interesting hard and soft edges and that the colors aren't blending as much. So like this blue, I didn't want it to blend as much with the pinks. So I'm going to go ahead and let that dry with the heat gun so that way I could then add in the blue and it wasn't blending with the rest of the colors. The difference with watercoloring versus watercoloring with like distress inks, you aren't going to be reactivating these colors as much as you would with inks. If you tried to do this kind of technique with inks, you would end up kind of reactivating the colors that are underneath, and you wouldn't be getting quite as distinct colors as you are here. They would have blended a little bit more. So here I'm going to add in a little bit more pink. I'm just kind of intensifying the colors, and adding more layers really creates a neat effect because the watercolors have a little bit of a translucency to them. So you're kind of seeing colors in between each other and it's really creating some fun effects. And it's super easy. You can just stop whenever you feel like you've added enough layers and colors and you get to the panel the way you like it. So I'm just going to keep doing this until I have the panel all finished, and then I'll set it aside to dry. Alright, so now we're moving on to the next technique. This is going to be creating some hearts. And this is another really easy technique. We all know how to do hearts. And it's a really simple shape. So I'm going to go ahead and add in my colors. Again, I'm using only 4 for this one. And I'm just going to quickly drop them into my little palette here. Once I have all my colors ready, I'm going to start painting. I'm using a fairly dry brush for this. I want my ink to kind of stay in place. I don't want it to blend too much. So I'm using a lot more ink than I am water. But I'm going to go ahead and start mixing these colors together. I'm going to start dropping in some of the other colors. I start by basically making a heart in one color, and then I drop in color of the other colors that I have on my palette. So here you can see I'm dropping in some purples, I'm dropping in some reds, and I'm just letting those blend together and mix on their own for the most part. I don't really blend them too much. You can see at times I kind of push it around with my brush, but I try not to blend it too much and let the water and the ink do its thing. So you can see I'm just doing the same thing here with these hearts. So I'm going to repeat this because this is pretty self-explanatory. So I'm just going to keep painting and I'll let you listen to the music, and then I'll be back when we start the next step. So here you can see I'm finishing up the panel, and I've got this all watercolored. I'm going to set this aside for a minute so that it can dry. Then we're going to go ahead and add some texture using some ink splatters in a little bit. Finally, my last technique is going to show you how to create some simple watercolor flowers. I'm just drawing in some leaves. You can paint these however way you want. Let your brush do a lot of the work. Go ahead, you can see I'm just quickly putting down a light line, and then I flatten out my brush to create a rounded leaf. It's a very simple and easy technique to do. I'm not using a whole lot of water for this. I'm letting the watercolor paints be most of what's on my brush. I'm just going to keep adding in some leaves. I ended up making 3 for this little cluster. So now I'm going to work on the flowers. The flowers are really simple. I just quickly drew a little bit of squiggles. They're kind of very expressive, not too detailed. So I'm just going to quickly add in some color, drop it around, and then I'll start dropping in some other colors to kind of blend things out and let the colors mix together. I'm making a slightly darker pink and by mixing some red and some pink together. You can see I'm just dropping this in. I'm letting the color move wherever it wants and just letting this kind of flow with each other, bringing in a little bit more red. And then what I'll do is I'll dry in between each layer. That way I can maintain some color separation. Moving on to the leaf again, I'm going to start adding in some shading. I'm just mixing some blues and purples here. These are very expressive florals and leaves that I'm creating here. So they're not going to be very realistic. I'm just kind of making some simple flowers. You can make pretty much anything look like a flower if you create the general shape. So I'm going to let you watch the painting, and then I'll be back in a minute when we start the next step. So once I got most of my base coloring down, I'm going to start adding in a little bit of detail. Again, these are going to be very expressive, so I'm not going to go too detailed. I'm just basically adding some darker shading along the centers of the flowers and along the edges of the leaves. And it's really basically just kind of wherever I feel like dropping in some color, that's what I do. There's no wrong or right way to do this. You just kind of do whatever you feel like you want to do. And just let the brush do the work, and you just kind of like flow along with the colors. And try not to overwork things, because you will then start to kind of lose that loose and free feel of the flowers. And I'm just going to quickly drop in some little berries, and these are just kind of adding a little bit of texture to the background. And I'll be turning this into a card layer by doing some simple watercoloring backgrounds like I did earlier in the video. And that was pretty simple to do, and I just used some greens and blues and a little bit of yellow and kind of made a beautiful little background to turn this into a card. Alright, so here's our watercolor panel all finished, and it's dry, so I'm going to take some water and some paint here, and I'm just going to flick on some water droplets in pinks, blues, purples, and just kind of mix the colors up to the ones that I had, and it really creates some nice fun textured background to this card. It looked cute as it was, but I love the organic look of the paint splatters, so I added those in to kind of bring in a little bit more color. So here you can see all of our panels. They're all finished, and it was really simple to do and a lot of fun. And all of that was using just a simple, inexpensive watercolor set that you can buy at any of your local craft stores. So if you enjoyed this video, be sure to head over to my blog where you can see more still shots of the finished cards that I created using these panels. And also be sure to stop on over for all the products and supplies used. If you enjoyed this video, here's another one that you might be interested in featuring watercoloring techniques. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.